brother. So, Larry, did he die just for his weak brother? Did he die just for Paul? Of course not. Larry's not going to say that he died just for Paul, but Larry has to say that to be consistent with his own doctrine, because his own doctrine teaches that when you see the word us, when you see the word his people, that means only us, only his people. And what I'm showing you, my friends, is that it doesn't just mean only, because if it did mean just only us or only his people, then it would mean only his brother that Christ died for, and it would mean only Christ dying for Paul. Only Christ dying for Paul, who gave himself for me. Who gave himself for me.
25.
Christ didn't just die for Paul. Christ didn't just die for his weak brother. Christ died for every man. Not just for us only, because this didn't say me only. And in order to keep his doctrine, he would have to agree that Christ died for one person.
All right, Larry Wessels will make his third reply.
Okay, thank you, Bob. All right, he's bringing up Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. Basically, anyone that looked at the reference there, has a Bible at home, you can see Paul is giving his testimony there, talking about himself. And when we think about Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus in Acts chapter 9, we find that once again, here's Christ himself appearing to Paul on the road. And God does something special for Paul that he doesn't do for just anybody in a general sense, like Steve's trying to affirm in this debate. God does as he wills in all the armies of the heavens and the earth, as Nebuchadnezzar mentioned in Daniel chapter 4, verse 35, and I've already mentioned that passage before. But God does whatsoever he wants to do. He's got the power. He's almighty. And so God wanted to save Paul right there. So he appeared to him on the road to Damascus as he's going to Damascus to try to kill the Christians and enslave them, bring them back to Jerusalem or whatever he was trying to do there. So God doesn't treat everybody the same. He doesn't. It's not an equal opportunity. God's not a union master where he's getting management to treat everybody the same. God doesn't do it that way. He does it the way he wants to do it. If he wants to save Paul and leave Caiaphas over here in his sin, then so be it. Then the high priest Caiaphas, he's going to stay in his unbelief. But over here, Paul, who killed Stephen in Acts chapter 7, he's going to save him. And that's God's choice. And that's why when we're looking at Galatians 2:20, as Steve mentioned here, it's ridiculous because context makes all the difference in the world. In fact, I'd like to ask Steve this question. Did Jesus give his life a ransom for all, according to Matthew chapter 20, verse 28, and Mark chapter 10, verse 45, or for many? See, just taking context of other scriptures in with this Galatians 2:20 he's bringing up shows you that Paul is not saying that Jesus only died for him and him alone. He's got to understand, Paul's talking about himself in his case, that Jesus actually died for him in a meaningful, personal way. And we find from this question, did Jesus give his life a ransom for all or for many? And there's a difference between those two words. We get a clear answer to what's going on here. Also, I'd like ask Steve another question. Did Jesus die for both the sheep and the goats? If so, are not all their sins paid for, including the sin of unbelief? Is not Jesus the good shepherd in John chapter 10 and Matthew 25? So did Jesus die for all their sins? And if he did, why aren't the goats saved? If he's died for every sin, including unbelief, how come the goats aren't saved like the sheep are, according to Jesus? Also, why does Jesus say few will be saved? In Luke chapter 13, verses 22 through 28. And even when people cry out to him, he will still not open the door he has shut in their face. In fact, Jesus relates a similar situation of a shut door in Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13, where you have the parable of the 10 virgins. Why doesn't God open the door to these people, even though they were calling on him to let them in? Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23 also ties into this, about the people who yelled to Jesus, Lord, Lord. And yet Jesus is going to say, depart from me, I never knew you. So we have a different attitude by God and by Jesus to different people. I'd like to mention too on this thing world, If you look at Genesis 41:57, and all countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the lands. John 15:18. If the world hate you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. Now, he's trying to make John 3:16 and God so loved the world, like it always means every last person in the world. But as you look at these verses and many more, Luke 2:1-3, Acts 2:5, and many others, there's no way the word world can mean every last man, woman, and child. You have to take everything in context. And in fact, in John 3:16, Jesus was talking to Nicodemus at night, and the Jews all thought that they were the only ones saved. And Jesus explained, no, it's going to be not just the Jews, but the Gentiles as well. Anyway, go with the Scripture, not opinions.
All right, we have Steve McCalip now with his fourth affirmative.
All right, not to spend too much more time, but Larry, I already told you the Scripture. He says, show me the Scripture where it says he was a ransom for all. That was his words. Show me the Scripture where it says he was a ransom for all. Well, my goodness, it said that exactly in 1 Timothy 2:6. It says, who gave himself, I hope you're listening, Larry, who gave himself a ransom for all. Yes, he also said he was a ransom for many, but he also said he's a ransom for all. And that shows you that many means all, Larry, okay? Now, Larry, I also asked you to show me, you talked about this word world and how it doesn't mean everyone. I said, show me one instance in the book of John or any books of John, because we were dealing with scriptures about John 3:16 and 1 John 2:2, where it talks about world. How did John, you talk about context. I'm asking for that context right now. Have you looked through the book of John and the epistles of John and looked at every time the word world occurred where John wrote his epistles and the Gospel of John? I told you he wrote the word world 80 times in the Gospel of John, and he used it about 15 times in his epistles. Not one time did John use the word world to mean elect. Not one time did John use the word world to mean anybody but the entire world. All right? Now, on to my fourth and final, well, this might be my final. Maybe I have one more here. Fourth affirmative. And this is going to be a doozy here because I don't know how he's going to get out of this one. I know Larry, most likely, I'm pretty sure, that he doesn't believe Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed Jesus. I don't believe that Larry thinks that Judas was a saved man. So Larry, I'm asking you, was Judas Iscariot, was he one of the elect, a saved saint of God? Was he one of the elect, a saved saint of God? I want you to answer that question. And when you answer that question no, as you probably will, hopefully, because the scriptures do say that Judas killed himself and went to his own place, and that was speaking of hell. But look what it says about Judas. Now keep in mind, my listening audience, that Judas was one of the 12 apostles. One of the 12. And when Jesus sat down at that Last Supper, as it's called, look what he said. All right, let me ask this question here. It says, wasn't Jesus speaking to all 12 disciples, including Judas? I'm asking you this, Larry. Was he speaking to Judas when he said, and he took bread and gave thanks and brake it and gave unto them? And then he said, this cup is the New Testament in my blood, which is shed for you. Now, I'm asking you, Larry, was he talking to Judas in that passage or not? Because he told the apostles, this cup is the New Testament in my blood, which is shed for you, the 12 apostles. And remember, Judas was one of those 12, and he said, this blood shed for you. Now, my friends, that is the heart of this whole teaching here, that Christ's blood was shed not just for some people, but for even people like Judas Iscariot, who we know was a false apostle. And I can show you proof of this. Well, first off, let me just tell you this here. In Luke chapter 22, it says, in verse 14 through 20, I want you to go back and look at this passage. Luke 22, 14 through 20. It says, when the hour was come, Jesus, it says, he sat down, and the 12 apostles with him. And he said unto them, and if you skip a few verses, it says, this is my body, which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me. Likewise also the cup after supper, saying, this cup is the New Testament in my blood, which is shed for you, Judas, the 12 apostles. He didn't just say it to the 11 apostles